form of sin or dhulm or harm in a human being when there isn't even an interest for the nafs. It's still a sin to aggress against another's rights to get a benefit oneself. But a sin like this is born out of pure evil because they're gaining nothing, they're proving nothing, it is unrelated. So as a recipient, for a moment imagining, being in in the Prophet Yusuf's place, I mean, imagine the weight of that moment. Imagine the human inclination for, at least affirming what's right, at least defending one's character, if not also the baser inclination for revenge and intiqam and so on and so forth. This is very real. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَأَصَرَّهَا يُوسُفُ فِي نَفْسِهِ وَلَمْ يُبْدِهَا لَهُ. So Yusuf concealed it, hid it in himself, and did not make his feelings plain to them. This is an encyclopedia in this part of this ayah. But in particular, you remember a couple weeks we were saying we should not look down on this suppression step. This is not always a bad way. No, in that moment, he's in a conversation, he's in public. What are you going to do? You can't take a side and manage the emotion and so on. So he suppressed it, but suppressed it consciously. Many people suppress feelings kind of passively or unconsciously. They just bottle up over time or just express in a wanton way. So I would suggest that each of these has a place in our tazkiyah process. And the same feeling or the same issue or the same relationship can move through these. But this movement is not just to graduate from 1 to 5 or to traverse through all the 5. It's very dependent on context. For example, these are, we talked about sajdat al-shukr, the prostration of gratitude last time, as an example of these more advanced, the elements of these more advanced forms. But when you're feeling kind of depleted or low energy, you may find that, you're not able to do this at a high level, or you try a little bit and it's not bringing immediate results with you. So using an escape, meaning going to a low energy thing, but where you're not going to be making decisions or writing that fiery email or expressing all over the person, is a very wise use of context. In other words, sometimes, it doesn't mean you skip the prayer, it doesn't mean you don't try spiritual tools, but in the moment, the weakness of the nafs, it may not be bringing you those immediate results. And that's okay. You're still rewarded based on the effort. But now I know that, look, even if it's going to a workout or sports game or halal entertainment, is much better than in this state of anger or frustration or desperation or whatever, I go make a decision that's going to harm somebody, or I go express all over somebody. So I think each of these will have a space, inshallah, in our lives. We spoke also about, and I want to emphasize this, inshallah, expand on it before switching gears to another passage, inshallah. We spoke about, and I know this is quite new for a lot of it's also hard to wrap your mind around, but I would suggest it's very powerful. We suggested a categorization for the whims of dunya, right? And remember when we said al-hawa, right? It doesn't always need to be negative. It doesn't always need to be evil. It's just kind of the wind outside. Sometimes it's windy, sometimes from the east, sometimes it's from the west. So it's just the pulls of dunya. Sometimes dunya can pull you to good, but often it's pulling you wherever it's going. And suggested to you these 3 broad categories by which a person can start to think about what's the dunya aspect that's pulling at them. Okay? And we said the first broad category is what? Control. It's control. Women for control. Okay? The second? Approval. Women for approval. And the third?
security.
Swimming for security. We did not introduce last time, and we will today, inshallah, several kind of other things that you imagine that I would suggest fall under this lower level. So we'll just leave that for a moment. But first, I want to give you a case study that was presented. I thought it was very broadly applicable. And so we'll see if we can just do this in a short lightning round in small groups. So what we're looking at is advice on how to look at the dunya component of a situation, do the work in the nafs, do the spiritual work to take that dunya component out and then go get the objective. But when the issue is presented to you, it's all a salad. It's all mixed. So you have to start analyzing it, and the purpose of all of these categories is to help you peel back the onion, if you will. Let me just give you the issue. Let's dive in and let's work on it together. This is a workplace issue. The issue that is presented is an issue of a person who in his workplace, they have, we have this expression like in Arabic, like be cautious of the evil of a person. It's one of those characters. It's a manager, so this person has organizational authority over this person who is just sharp-tongued, haphazard, just very direct. And the reaction of this, in this case study, is avoidance. That this person is just so full of shar that I kind of do my job, and if I don't have to interact with that person, I don't. I keep my distance. Okay? When I do, I gotta get in and get out, because in particular in this case study, advice has been offered, right? So both to that person and organizationally, it's like, hey, could we avoid curse words in the workplace? Could you not like rat out people or just berate them when they do wrong? But it's not changed a thing. This person curses right and left. If you make a typo, he'll call you out in front of the whole room and start yelling at you, like saying you're a failure, no idea why I gave this to you in this first place, and so on. So very, very aggressive personality. And the question becomes, you're in an advisory role for this person. What would you advise them to do in this situation? What are the steps that you would advise them to do? What would you advise them to do in themselves? What would you advise them to do with others? And how would you apply this overall framework? So the broad question is going to be an uncomfortable thing, but it's nice and messy. We'll figure it out together. Everybody understand the case study? Everybody understand it? No. Good. That's why I'm asking. Tell me. So to give you an example, for example, a person might come and say, should I not advise that person because I'm just trying to control them, I don't control them? Would you say yes or no? Consider that. Is my frustration with that person, is that just really a dunya whim that I want them to approve of me, or is it not? Answering those questions is what we want to do in this case study. Think about that. And what would you advise them to do at the end? Who would they talk to? What do? They get another job, they talk to somebody in HR. What would you advise and why? You understand? Yes.
Who are we advising?
We're advising the employee who's dealing with like a berating, cursing, overwhelmed, like a very aggressive boss. Clear as mud? All right. Don't worry, we're doing this together, but hop in. I know it takes vulnerability, but just hop in, figure it out, see what you can peel back, and then we'll come back together as a group, inshallah, in about 4 minutes.
So I think the best way to do it, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's to look at ways to deal with it that you control, ways to deal with it that you control and security, and then be able to mix and match the best out of all three strategies. So what I mean by that is like for the person to keep on control in a workplace, for instance, like you always say, make sure you have one email, write in all, make sure that you're able to outperform the individual, losing control sort of what triggers that shortcoming that I've been working in that certain way. That approval, like seeking that approval, seeking other departments being able to put other employees as well, approval on this individual sort of workplace leader, being part of the company resolution for other people that are not necessarily able to sort of flash the person. Security one, I don't know if it's a direct reflection of the control. I don't want to say turn the tables on them, but holding yourself the conversations that are coming that you've done all of those
Okay, let's come back together, inshallah, peel this apart. With your permission, I'm going to push on you a little bit, because if you struggle through this one or two times, then you'll be able to, inshallah, apply it to real work. I could give you some neat and clean, like textbook example, and you would learn next to nothing. This is actually a real life situation where someone was approached for advice on a situation. I changed some of the characters and some of the characteristics, so it's not identifiable with a person, but it's based on a real life case study. That's why real life situations are complex. They're mixed together. And so applying this is synonymous with being able to peel that back to real life. So what's one thing that your group motivated or discussed, inshallah, to help us advise in this particular situation? It's one thing you would advise them to do, yes?
You should take a moment and deal with your coach. And since you deal with professionals, I think we should ask for time for one-on-one.
For a one-on-one with the manager?
Yes.
Okay.
For one-on-one, so that everybody will feel comfortable with you, where you don't want to get intimidated. And then you voice which your concern assertively, but not passively, because you want to make sure your point is covered.
Okay. Jazakumullah khairan. So, very nice suggestion to sit one-on-one with a person, voice the concerns. You described it as not aggressively, but assertively. Excellent. I have your permission, inshallah, to read this back to the whole class and play a bit of angel's advocate, inshallah. Push back, inshallah. Is that okay?
Yes.
Why sit with that person? All you want to do is you're willing for approval. Why should you sit with that person? You don't need them to approve of you anyway.
Supposedly, certainly so when the Prophet was asked to give judgment about a situation that seemed clear cut, where there was a shield or something that was stolen, and everybody gave false testimony, or basically there was one person who was misrepresenting their story, and without even having listened to the other side of the story, it would be wrong to either make a judgment or to give advice or whatever. It would not be wise. So it's always best to.
Okay, interesting. So there may be a perspective or something about that person missing. Okay, great. I'm going to repeat back the same question. Who can build on it? Why sit with that person? All you're wanting to do is to be approved by them or accepted by them. You don't need their acceptance.
It's not just approval. It's about, if it's a work-related situation, you're creating a hostile work environment, and that's negatively affecting the whole group. And if you don't address it, then that negativity just gets bigger and bigger, and then the morale is very low. It's not about approval. It's about righting a wrong that is affecting everybody.
Okay? Yes, what else?
Wouldn't that be a lack of control as well? Because if your manager is treating you this way, you have a lot of control.
Awesome. So like in this little piece of unraveling this thing, what's happening is we're building a model, we're essentially building a chart for your emotions. What's happening? We're building a chart for emotions and seeing what's driving it underneath. So I know I come back from work. Give me a word. Angry, right?
Frustrated.
Tense, frustrated. Why? That why is a mix of stuff. Some of that stuff is very important and you should stand up for it. So a hostile, working to make an acceptable work environment is not a dunya whim. That's like rights. Yes, you're right. But the problem is when you're angry, that's also mixed up with like, I I wish that I had like a remote control and I could just zip that person's lips, right? No, apparently I'm the only one that ever has whispers like that because you're all looking at me dumbfounded, right? Or you wish that I had never gotten this job. I wish it wasn't 2008 because I'd be out this door so fast. But there's no jobs there and I can't afford to go out. Those pieces, those are questions, but they're not useful questions. Why? Because there's nothing you can do to impact them. But when I'm working to make an inclusive workplace, that's something I can go work for. Doesn't mean I'll get it, but the pursuit itself and the action is something that is in accordance with Sharia, and it's something that's rewarded, it's something that's praiseworthy, it's something that's ethically centered. When I say, why me? Why couldn't it have been somebody else? And these are questions that we all have. Right? Let's get real with one another. So when I just know that I'm angry, that's a big hot mess of all that stuff. It's all mixed together. So what we're doing is unshackling, trying to unshackle ourselves from the dunya portion so you can go get what's of benefit. So it's not accurate to say that sitting with a person is based off of wanting that person's approval. But by thinking through it, you're stripping that, pulling that portion away so you can go in assertively. Otherwise, if you come with this, you might just unload on that person or be very aggressive or be very vengeful. Okay, what's another piece of advice?
Our group focused on a bit of internal reflection on this analysis of the situation itself. So for instance, you're getting a lot of criticism. There's a lot of hostile environment in your workplace. So how are we able to sort of sit amongst ourselves and sort of separate the emotion from the shortcomings that might kind of come out of me, also the shortcomings that might kind of come out of him, and sort of dissect each specific situation. So is there a job or a specific task that I can get better at? Is there a communication aspect that I can get better at? Am I keeping receipts of all my emails with this person that I can sort of attain control over later? And then am I able to communicate with the rest of the team better on? But just focusing on myself first. What did I do wrong? And then fixing that would help me sort of communicate further. So when I'm able to sit down with them on a one-on-one, I know what I do right and wrong. At the end of the day, like, we understand that there's situations that we can't control out of them. It might be negativity, it might be they're always ready to criticize no matter what my production rate is at. So just being able to know that my product and my effort, something that I can control, is controlled versus them. They might hate their job. They might hate the fact that they're a manager to begin with. So focus on what you control.
Great suggestions. Can I push back so we, inshallah, try to go together? You have something on this point, yeah?
Sometimes the manager maybe even feeling threatened by use of image. That's why he's kind of trying to put any stop against whatever you're trying to do or something like that. So that kind of helps in and having a discussion to see like what's the problem and trying to understand and have a misunderstanding that can be fixed.
This is great advice. There's a danger to this path. That's why we need to structure it. If I carry this advice too far, what could happen? I'll give you an example. Somebody said it here. Self-deprecation, self-loathing, that I see that I'm deserving of this treatment, right? That doesn't mean that this advice doesn't fit. It means now that we're learning to contextualize it, whether for ourselves and then eventually perhaps to help others. So a person could carry this to an incorrect conclusion that they're deserving of this treatment, right? Some workplaces have a very, very toxic workplace culture for women. Some workplaces have very, very toxic workplace culture for immigrants or for whoever is considered an other or an outsider, right? And in these types of situations, blaming oneself could actually be counterproductive. So how do I separate between being open to criticism, growing myself, but not moving towards being self-loathing or self-deprecating or falsely blaming myself when somebody else should carry responsibility, right? That's actually up here. The lack of security. So building one's self-security in a way that is more and more independent of the environment helps a person go after it. One of the emotions that a person will demonstrate is apathy. Who cares? Nobody cares about me. Nobody, I've always deserved this. A very, very sad example of this is actually to see people sometimes in their 30s and 40s are having very real hindrances in the workplace that are based on how they were dealt with as 5 and 8 and 10-year-olds. Very, very, very heavy form of bullying and very real thing in our communities and in our world. Most of us, when we look at apathy, when we look at anger, they seem like two opposite ends of the spectrum. What we're trying to do here is put them under a single umbrella. This is less energy, this is more energy, but they're both rolling up some descriptions of the poles of dunya. One is rolling it up with this like sinking into dunya, right? It's a deep attachment to dunya, right? And that's apathy. But another kind is kind of lashing out back at dunya. It's a higher energy response. But they're both emotional responses to some underlying trigger. So, can you run a marathon carrying an extra, 100 pounds? I can't. Maybe you can. But maybe you could run down to the mailbox or to the street. Would it be easier if you let go of that extra baggage? Absolutely. No matter how fast or how strong you are, you're going to move better, more deliberately, if you let go of that baggage. So this is removing that extra dunya baggage, not letting go of being goal-oriented or going after objectives or getting something. Other advice for this particular situation.
We actually compare the control to the manage process of dealing with feelings that are reframing the use of mind to change how we feel about our feelings or help some managers' feelings from their own perspective. With this manager, constantly you with negativity, trying to stay on top of your assignments and productivity, and despite that, they're still going to find some negative kind of approach to deal with you. So you try to change this in your mind, and I'm trying to do the best I can and make my goal and productivity, even though it's coming with all this negatives. You're trying to change that within yourself. It's not that you are assimilating and trying to get into apathy. No, you're trying to make sure I remain focused. It's like someone is trying to push you out in a way, even though you are doing good. They are telling you, you are not doing good, but you are doing good. So in this, what I'm doing fits the requirements, right? And it goes with HR, and they won't say anything wrong with what I'm doing. I think I'm good. So I know I can have my approval from a higher authority than what he's doing. And from the approval point of view, that it doesn't really matter if I have his approval and you have some other people I'm bullying, right? Such that even if it marks me negatively, I can protest these based on my own productivity that I have. And the security, or lack of security, having the tawakkul that Allah is the one that provides at the end of the day. Yeah, I don't want to at the end of the day try to put my trust or my resources or my risk with these people. Even if I'm the best of employee here or I have everybody's approval, things can change. Everything is good and lost, and that's very important. So, even though you are doing the best you can, trusting that Allah is the one that controls situations. So, and that will really help you to keep going while doing the job.
No, definitely a lot of fantastic examples, and I love how we're bringing these spiritual tools into a real life example. And so, like for us, bringing this into the things in our lives where we don't have the solution, where we really don't know, brings something new brings a whole different dimension to your relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay? And that involves vulnerability. That involves openness. That necessitates discomfort. But the end or the outcome of that with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is freedom for the person, freedom from the shackles of the outcome of that to seek approval from your workplace superiors is going to be, or any person, or the dollar, or companionship, or this or that, is at the end shackles, is a constriction. And that is the deception of dunya. وَلَا تَغُرَّنَّكُمُ الْحَيَاةُ الدُّنْيَا وَلَا يَغُرَّنَّكُمْ بِاللَّهِ الْغَرُورُ. Do not let the life of this world deceive you, and do not let the great deceiver, the shaitan, deceive you either. And so, bringing this in helps you, even the same action. Let's say you start keeping a much better paper trail. You start documenting your steps. I would absolutely advise this person to do that if they were asking me. But you could do that from a place of it's not going to make a difference to seek an approval that may or may not come. Or you can do that to defend your own security, to be self-secure, to be powerful in your work, and to build a case to stand up for your rights. It's the same action. But what changes the heart underlying the action. Okay? So many other examples. You can work really hard. Absolutely. Man, I wish I knew there was something called HR in graduate school. I think graduate schools across America should be introduced to this revolutionary concept called human resources. It's really sad, and I know this is somewhat from a place of privilege. Like, I do recognize that there are greater injustices, other parts of the world, maybe even in the American workplace. I'm not suggesting that HR shows them, but just in my own experience coming into graduate school, I remember like there was this one person, they were receiving like visitors it's like checking out like an interview. And the workplace supervisor would gather their current graduate students who would like just receive these interviewees essentially and force them to disclose all of the private and confidential consultations that they would have, right? To rat out everybody. Every week, they would put on a graph for people that were making less than working, and I'm just saying this as a fact, working less than at the McDonald's around the street full time, would put up a graph and publicly berate anyone that was working less than 90 hours a week in front of all their colleagues. And so many people were afraid to speak out, especially those that felt that, their visa status or their immigration status might be threatened, right? By a person. It's very sad. But now, going after those objectives with full vigor, I'm going to stand up for our rights. I'm not going to be pushed around. I can seek allies. I can seek help. Still does not need to, can be synonymous with freeing myself from the dunya baggage of having my self-security, my self-image, my wholeness connected to whether the manager listens or HR listens or so on and so forth. This is the enterprise of a lifetime, especially those that are working in service. Even, alhamdulillah, you burst out of that Raleigh Cary bubble and you go visit people that are struggling to make ends meet, or you visit the parts of Cary where it doesn't look like the rest of Cary, and you connect with people. Still, we understand that we are not speaking on behalf of those people who are living that experience, but we're breaking that bubble and getting closer. It is always easier to imagine hope before it is snatched from you. It is always easier to think of a better situation when you are in a position of comfort or privilege. But the challenge I'm submitting to you is look at this family. The Sayyidah Hajar alayha salam finds certainty when? During the most uncertain time of her life. Dunya is blaring sirens, right? Barren desert, no drink. She doesn't have an explanation. She asks Prophet Ibrahim, who are you leaving us to? But once she knows it's from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, she releases this without knowing how it's going to work out. You see that. Again, when I say releases this, I'm suggesting a structure. I'm not suggesting this is the only way to look at it. But what we know is that she releases herself from the shackles of dunya, of fear, right? It's another one here. Imagine the amount of fear that a person could be overcome with in that moment. They could be debilitated. Or other people just give up. Okay, you said tawakkul, right? I'm going to sit down and tawakkal ala Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? Wait for the rain, water, and so on to come to me. Right? That's an expression of apathy. Or lashing out. Why me? Why is this happening? Right? Why couldn't somebody else carry it? This is more of an expression of anger. But at the end, they're all expressing some whim, some pull of dunya. Right? And this family was free of that. When Prophet Ibrahim was commanded to sacrifice his son, he did not do it at night when the son was sleeping, so that he wouldn't notice. He in fact used questioning and dialogue, and the son became part of the submission, part of the acceptance of what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is phenomenal. He said, my father, do what you have been commanded to do. Other emotion that is grief. Okay? Slightly higher energy than apathy, but still very settled into dunya, right? And typically, these lacks, okay? And a lack here can be expressed as a desire to have or a desire not to have. The releasing of it is a detachment, is a distance, is a minimization of the affairs of dunya. Another is lust. We mentioned earlier the issue of shahawat, and we mentioned this also, the statement of Shaykh Muhammad al-Ghazali last time. A lot of people who are courting or considering a partner, is the first, one of the early times in life that they differentiate. And that's why searching for a partner actually really reveals much more about oneself before it does the other person. Because in the process of searching for a partner, in the Islamic sense, where a person does not have license to just let the easy part go, the emotional part, and so on, until doing essentially the intellectual part, the courtship, the discussion, so forth, so on and so forth. It's one of the early times that with one of the powerful shahwat that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given, a person is forced to differentiate between lust and what we might call love or attachment or mahabba or mawadda or some higher form that is more complete. In both, there is an expression of shahwa. We keep the words high, inshallah, because we're a diverse age group, alhamdulillah. But in both, there is an expression of shahwa. But a person is disciplining themselves here to essentially make a more full commitment rather than to lust or desire some expression without anything else. And in that sense, it can be broader than just, in our English culture, lust is often associated with companionship, right? But I described to you the lust for the dinner table at the end of a long fast of Ramadan, right? Where the eyes want to consume the whole table, the tablecloth, the plates, and the dining table room legs, inshallah, take it all in one inhalation, alhamdulillah. That's a lust, right? That's an emotional expression. And the next, man, there's a lot of this in American politics right now, I'm just saying, right? Pride. So it's moving to a higher energy, a more outgoing, but a rooted in dunya emotional expression. The Quran al-Karim says, وَلَا تُصَعِّرْ خَدَّكَ لِلنَّاسِ. Right? Sa'd is actually a disease that befalls camels. If you guys ever ridden a camel before or seen it, don't give me this llama stuff that these Americans are, that we have here in the American. I'm just saying. I need a bona fide, real camel, right? And I'm going to make a guilty admission. The first time I saw a real one, it was in Egypt. It was the 90s, so there was Aladdin fever going around, and we're expecting these scrawny little starving Disneyified animals. And it's this magnificent creature. It's also really big, right? So even in Arabic, the word is different from like a julus or sitting because it's a different process. It's like a multi-stage bending so that you can take like a ladder and climb up, right? It's still high and out of reach. But subhanAllah, Quran uses a powerful example here. Sa'd is a disease that befalls, or a condition that befalls the camel, where the neck can no longer lower in the way that when the camel lowers and kind of bends its legs twice and then lowers its neck. So imagine a neck that is always raised. So the advice comes in the Quran, وَلَا تُصَعَّرْ خَدَّكَ. Don't raise your cheek up. You see people, mashallah, when they talk to you, they always look down because their nose is in the clouds. They have to like look down at you. This expression teaches us, don't walk around people like this, right? Don't walk like you're too good for the ground that we're walking on, right? Be cautious of pride and arrogance, small and large ones. I'll ask you a quick question to exchange with a partner. If you were offered a great gift in dunya, would you choose fame or fortune? And why? Share with a partner, inshallah. If you were offered one or the other, would you choose fame or fortune? And why?
Fortune can make you famous.
That's exactly right. But unfortunately,
I'm just asking.
If you haven't switched perspectives, make sure you do. If your partner hasn't shared one, make sure you switch.
No, I'm not disagreeing with you. I just think, like, you hit it right on the head. It really just has to do with your type of personality and things that you struggle. So a lot of people see fame as a tool to do good. Some people see fame as the conversation given that most famous people that are today, that are living today, are not worthy to be famous, or the reason why the world is the way it is. You see money as evil, money is root of all evil. So it just has to do with your perspective and what you're going to do. If you use good fortune or bad fortune, great thing, it's really that thing. Because fame can be associated with negative things, but it's also like,
Okay, let's go back together.
right, so,
If you were given the choice,
right.
if you were offered fame or what? Fortune. Which would you choose? If you were offered fame or fortune, which would you choose? I share this question with you because I was asked this question some years ago, like you, when I started working my mind and answering the question and figuring out which one I wanted. And then I heard the story of a person who was asked that question. If you were offered fame or fortune, which would you choose? And he answered, contentment. Okay, fine, it's a trick question. But I say that because it's true, define fortune, right? But when I was asked the question, I got trapped with those two choices, much like I imagine most of you did. That's answering the question. And yet there is great depth in that answer. To choose contentment. Notice, I didn't say happiness. This is very uncomfortable, by the way. Actually, it's a very deep issue of discussion among the scholars. You'll notice, particularly during times of relative comfort and ease, people will start debating whether happiness is actually like an objective, like Islam makes you happy. But you meet a lot of people, and it's difficult for people in particular circumstances to be asked to be happy. They're living under oppression, when they don't have an ally in the world, when they're hungry, when they have to watch their kids hungry. So is it more attainable to ask for contentment? That even as the heart is unwaveringly focused on a change, on actuating that change, that my self-security, that my self-approval, that my connection with God is too valuable to be left in the hands of another person. This issue, by the way, is uncomfortable. A lot of khutab, a lot of durus would be very uncomfortable saying that you are asked Islamically to love yourself. To love yourself. Not in an arrogant sense, not in a proud sense, but to understand وَلَقَدْ كَرَّمْنَا بَنِي آدَمَ, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has honored and dignified all of the progeny of Adam, and that God-given dignity is not for any person to take away from you no matter what is done. Very powerful narration for Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anhu. I'm summarizing a longer story, and I'm actually not taking the main lesson, I'm taking a lesson that is between the lines. Listen for it. Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anhu is asked about his love for the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And in summary, asked if he loves more than his wealth, than his children, his possessions, than this dunya, peace, and so on and so forth. And one after other, Umar ibn Khattab says yes, 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 which is a high spiritual state. It's easy to say I love Allah and His Messenger more than our wealth. It's something else to give up a job or move to change a career or take a lower job offer because it's in accordance with the Sharia. That's love, right? That's love. But then he is asked, more than yourself, O Umar? Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu anhu says, no. So was he honest about the others or not? You see, that's a statement of the honesty of the others, because when he's asked, you love more than yourself, he said no. incredibly honest, because he said this to the Prophet ﷺ himself. You see the honesty and the vulnerability of the companions. Rasul ﷺ raised the bar. He said, "No, O Umar, no, until I am more beloved to you than your own self." So Umar radiallahu anh did not give an autopilot Muslim response. Okay, yeah, more than yourself. No, he went, this is a big request. This is a high level. He went and struggled with himself, reflected on it. In fact, thought about his life before he met the Prophet ﷺ, before he had guidance. Umar radiallahu anh had many gifts. He is a person who is very courageous, very principled, but he did not have guidance early in life. And so that courage and strength was often misused to stand for the wrong principles. Until he came back, he told the Prophet ﷺ that, "Wallahi, now you are more beloved to me than my own self." So the Prophet ﷺ smiled and said, "Al-ana ya Umar, al-ana ya Umar." Now, O Umar, now, O Umar. You see this transformation of this already incredible person, that what it means to love Allah and love His Messenger even more than what loves oneself. That's the main lesson. But in this story is also what? That Umar loved himself and that the Prophet ﷺ was present. So on what authority did we start our youth group or a khutbah with a lecture about how the more you debase yourself and lower yourself, somehow that's more spiritual and connected to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? The mind is very powerful. But at the end, I'm going to say something that's very obvious, but very hard to perceive in the moment. The map is not the territory. The map is not the territory. And the description is not the experience. So you look at a map, it all fits in a nice place, but that's not the territory. When you're there, you see the hills and you see how hard it is to climb and so on. The map's just a representation. And the description is not the experience. The experience is the experience. But the description is not the experience. So part of the importance of this spiritual work is because if a person does not master their own emotions, their pulls, then what you're living in is not reality, it's your map of reality, your mental map. And people can live and become trapped in a very dark map of the world if you're not. What we're doing now is taking a more active perspective. We're cleaning, we're orienting, we're directing as you go through dunya. Big part, I believe, of that spirituality is the ability to master these rather than the normal human propensity being led by them. Often what comes to my mind here is siyam. يا أيها الذين آمنوا كتب عليكم الصيام كما كتب على الذين من قبلكم لعلكم تتقون. Right? That fasting is prescribed to you as it was prescribed to those before you, that you may attain God consciousness. That sacrifice, that disciplining, that struggle is better than that you become slave and subservient to desires forever. One dimension of fasting. So similarly here, part of the importance of this work is to be more active in one's own map and one's own kind of experience and one's own lens on dunya. Make it more spiritual. Why else is this important? I'll give you a quick story. There's it's actually not just in the Arab world. In the Arab world, he's known by this name, but he appears in other cultures. But many of you may have heard some stories of a person named Juha, or if you're Egyptian, Goha, I'm sorry. So I don't offend you. Right? So like a folk story that has many like basic lessons. The story of Goha, sorry, that's the Egyptian coming out, and his son. And it's said that they both rode a donkey and started going among people. And then people started to ridicule them. Look at these selfish and oppressive family, 2 people on 1 animal, poor donkey. So Guha was very affected, didn't want people to think that he was selfish and oppressive, so he asked his son to go down. And he rode the donkey, his son walked along, till he came to another group of people. They said, what an insolent, disrespectful son. Excuse me, what a selfish father. In his age, he rides a donkey and his poor young kid is walking on the side. So Guha felt very ashamed. So he dismounted the donkey, brought his son up until they came to another group. And they said, what an insolent, disrespectful child. His older father walks while he rides the donkey. And so Guha felt very ashamed. So he told his son to go down. They both walked and they pulled the donkey along. So they came to another group of people. They said, what foolish people, they're walking and the donkey is carrying nothing. So Guha was stuck. What else do you do? Until his son suggested that they should both carry the donkey on their back and walk, at which also people would have mocked and ridiculed. So part of the importance here is that the pulls of dunya, and particularly the pull to please people, is an objective that is never attained. If you are trying to please people, the one who is pleased with you today will be displeased tomorrow. And if you please a group, you will upset another. And sometimes in pleasing people, you will displease Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And sometimes in pleasing people, you will violate your ethics and values. But other times it won't. And so to have a more steady moral compass, that there is no obedience to any of the creation at the expense of obeying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and to make one's objective pleasing Allah Azza wa Jal, is really the central goal and the central objective of al-tazkiyah. So, a lot more to say about this. In particular, if you still find it confusing, that's great, because that means you're thinking about it. Perhaps, inshallah, next time or the time after, I'll bring like an actual individual activity where you look at dozens and dozens of emotions and think about which ones most affect you, and then you can help map this, inshallah. But in general, this takes time to master. So we're putting a framework. As we go, we're going to go into several stories now of Prophet Ibrahim's later life. Perhaps you can be looking for some of the spiritual tools, but just imagine yourself in that moment. Like we're talking about Prophet Yusuf. You know, how many times, honestly, have we read that verse? They said, oh, if he stole, his brother stole before, and we sail right along. Like, think about it, and think about what it means. You know, many of you, alhamdulillah, are blessed with children. Think about what it means to be asked to give that for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You know, others are blessed, alhamdulillah, with family or security. Imagine what it feels to be left in a desert, and so on and so forth, inshallah. About to switch gears, are there any questions, inshallah, about this topic before we switch gears to another passage of the Quran?
Mark, can I give apologies, take you back to your very first lecture in the series, which I missed, where I'm sure you introduced why we think the story of Prophet Ibrahim. And just give us like a reset of that, given now we know a little bit more about this.
Jazakallah khairan. The question was, why, introducing why study the story of Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam. So helpful lectures to refer back to for details would be the first lecture of the year and the first lecture of this term, where I gave you the same in a different lens. We looked at, how many characteristics? It was 7 characteristics by which Prophet Ibrahim was praised in the Quran. Broadly reviewing a couple very briefly. First of all, this ummah has a special attachment to this prophet among all of the prophets. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed, ثُمَّ أَوْحَيْنَا إِلَيْكَ أَنِ اتَّبِعْ مِلَّةَ إِبْرَاهِيمَ حَنِيفًا وَمَا كَانَ مِنَ الْمُشْرِكِينَ. We revealed to the Prophet ﷺ that then we revealed to you, O Muhammad, that you should follow the millah, the way, the example of Abraham, and he was not from the polytheists. And so this was revealed exclusively about Prophet Ibrahim, not in the same way of any other prophet, though they are all brethren, alhamdulillah, in the mission. Secondly, our ummah has a special attachment. You see this attachment evidently in the Hajj, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also says in the Quran, إِنَّ أَوْلَى النَّاسِ بِإِبْرَاهِيمَ الَّذِينَ اتَّبَعُوهُ هَذَا النَّبِيُّ وَالَّذِينَ آمَنُوا. That the people most deserving of prophet, of affiliation to Abraham, are those that followed him, and this prophet, meaning Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and those that believed, meaning inshallah us. And so there's a specific commandment from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for this unique attachment. Although we are followers of Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we share a special bond. But also some of the practical lessons. Prophet Ibrahim was praised by Allah in so many ways that we are very much missing, many of us, in our lives. Prophet Ibrahim, all of his dua in the Quran al-Kareem was accepted by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The exception is the istighfar for his father, which was refined by Allah Azza wa Jalla. We're all desperate and thirsty for accepted dua in a time where our distance from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes us feel that distance also in dua. This is a person who lived much life through great hardship. And a problem, I was really touched by what Imam Suhaib said last time. He said it in the context of family, but I think we can criticize that too many of our lectures are about how to live perfect family, perfect monetary this, perfect that. It's really easy for me to just say, yeah, what do you want? Give me a question. Credit card, haram. Bank account, haram. Houses, haram. This, haram. That's easy. That's living in perfection. But being practical, many of you were at the MJ Fiqh Day, we're like, okay, no, in basis, here's our Sharia. Here's where we're able to get within compliance, but this is still better than this option, so this is best. That's maturity, right? That's living in imperfection. So Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam lived in multiple countries in our time. He traveled. He lived a part of his life where he and Sarah and Prophet Lut were the only Muslims on the face of the planet. That's a very powerful lesson for a sister who's the only Muslim woman in her workplace, or a young Muslim man who's the only high schooler or in a handful of five. And so those specific lessons, among many others, I think are very, very applicable to our time. This is not to disrespect or minimize other prophets, but prophets had different contexts. The Prophet Muhammad ﷺ and Prophet Ibrahim were among the prophets that lived the most varied contexts. So for example, you can take Prophet Sulaiman as an example for a person of authority and strength and with the dunya at their fingertips, but not affected by it. You cannot take Prophet Sulaiman as an example for a zahid who has very little money. He never lived in that context. But we accept him and honor him as a prophet. You can honor Prophet Isa, alayhi salam, ulul azmi min ar-rusul, huge responsibility and so on. But can you take him as an example as a married, husband or parent? You cannot. He did not live in that context. So Prophet Ibrahim, part of the applicability of this example is that he lived in very different contexts, many of which have strong parallels to our times, inshallah. There's a lot more, but those are some. Yes?
Yeah, you spoke of mapping, and I took notes on it.
Spoke of what, I'm sorry?
Mapping, the mind.
Mapping, yeah.
And mapping, you said it takes time. What are some of the part of the mind? How you think, how you thinking now, and then you start mapping, you said, quick benefit, time going, you developing in order to use the mapping technique.
I'll reflect on it, inshallah. I think I understand the Jazakallah khair, a very poignant question. So the mapping of our minds, how we go through dunya, comes very naturally. For example, I'm going to tell you really now to focus very intently on not bringing this to your mind. I want you to very intently make sure you do not think of a pink elephant with a bow tie around its ears in your mind right now. Right? So just don't think about the pink elephant. Make sure it's not pink. And definitely don't put that bow tie around his ears, right? So how many people didn't think of a baked elephant? See, I said don't, but our mind is not wired that way. First you bring it, and then you push it away, right? In fact, some of you may have experienced it as a pink elephant, and then it kind of gets distanced or makes smaller. Our minds do it in different ways, but everybody paints that picture. Now, people naturally, some people are more visual, some people are more auditory, some people are more kinesthetic, but this is a very natural way that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created us to function. What many of us don't do is become more conscious about that process. How do we use our hearts, our minds, our bodies to rush towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? So what I'm suggesting is a very basic, it's essentially starting to stitch together the fabric of emotion. That's what we're doing. We're talking about the fabric of emotion and the language of thought. But this is like the very, very basic level. So some of the early fruits come from being more conscious about the process. None of us are conscious about the water fountain down the hallway until when? Until you're fasting. Then you're very conscious about it, right? You know exactly where it is. You could draw a little blueprint in your mind. Why? Because we've elevated ourselves. So as you work on this, you will start to get fruits in your life very quickly, inshallah, with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's tawfiq, by dealing with the same issues in different ways. Now, if Allah blesses you with a change, that's icing on the cake. But now, we spoke about this, if you remember a little bit in the hadith last year, لا تغضب, do not become angry. That from the fruits of this disciplining is that a person's inner state becomes more protected from being in the hands of people. So a person that does not do this takes on several risks. Number one, your happiness, contentment, etc. becomes in the hands of what you have and other people. So for example, being happy when, healthy, but not other. By the way, some people are reversed. Some people are super spiritual when they're sick. They're really close to Allah. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala help you. If things are going well, other side. So how can you remove that dependency? How can I not, be based on whether people like me, adore me, raise me, or debate? All of that are some of the fruits, inshallah, that will come with this. Okay? If it's helpful, inshallah, I get the sense from the questions that it might be helpful. I'll do a little activity for you next time, inshallah, with some specific individual emotions, so you can see how this fits in the book. Any last questions, inshallah, before we switch gears? Yes. Absolutely. No, alhamdulillah, this is from the indications of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's acceptance, but also how much Allah intertwined and brought the connection to this family in our lives. Jazakumullah khairan for reminding us of this, that in our salah every day, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala ali Muhammad, kama sallaita ala Ibrahim wa ala ali Ibrahim. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made the connection with this family a part, not just of our lives, but of our days. We are connected. We're just becoming more conscious of that connection. Obviously, Hajj and Umrah, very special connection with this family, as Eid al-Adha as well. So many lessons, but particularly this, Jazakumullah khairan for reminding us, the daily connection with this family, inshallah. We want to open our masahif, inshallah, to Surah Al-Baqarah. We started the first part of this passage a couple times ago and started talking about Tazkiyah. And this is Surah Al-Baqarah, chapter number 2, verse number 120.
آمنا وارزق أهله من الثمرات من آمن منهم بالله واليوم الآخر متعوا قليلا ثم بالنار وبئس.
It's not my fault.
إبراهيم القواعد من البيت وإسماعيل ربنا تقبل منا إنك أنت السميع العليم ربنا واجعلنا مسلمين لك ومن ذريتنا أمة مسلمة لك وأرنا مناسكنا وتب علينا إنك أنت التواب الرحيم ربنا وابعث فيهم رسولا منهم يتلو عليهم آياتك ويعلمهم الكتاب والحكمة ويزكيهم إنك أنت العزيز الحكيم ومن يرغب عن ملة إبراهيم إلا من سفه نفسه ولقد اصطفيناه في الدنيا وإنه في الآخرة لمن الصالحين إذ قال له ربه أسلم قال أسلمت لرب العالمين ووصى بها إبراهيم بنيه ويعقوب يا بني إن الله اصطفى لكم الدين فلا تموتن إلا وأنتم مسلمون أم كنتم شهداء إذ حضر يعقوب الموت إذ قال لبنيه ما تعبدون من بعدي قالوا نعبد إلهك وإله آبائك إبراهيم وإسماعيل وإسحاق إلها واحدا ونحن له مسلمون تلك أمة قد خلت لها ما كسبت ولكم ما كسبتم ولا تسألون عما كانوا يعملون
So we started this discussion a couple weeks ago. The ayah on the page before. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala declared that He tested Prophet Ibrahim and Prophet Ibrahim fulfilled the commandments of Allah completely. And on account of that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made him as Imam or leader for all people. Inshallah, I want to start with a few minutes of reflection. I encourage you to maybe get up or change your space or turn your chair, inshallah. We want to focus particularly on the part of this passage from ayah number 126, which is the account of the raising of the Kaaba from its foundations by Prophet Ibrahim and Prophet Ismail to the middle of the page, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about the Islam or the submission and istislam of this great Prophet and the commandment of others to follow. I'd like you to list in a small group, inshallah, every lesson that you extract, every reflection that you extract from this half page, from the top half of the page, inshallah, of these 5 verses. I'm going to go ahead and take, inshallah, about 5 minutes to do that. Group size would be good, maybe about 5-7 people or so, inshallah.
That like every month but it also that how far it went. Prayers did not
Yeah.
So we'll take another 1 minute and then we'll come back again. Bismillah ar-Rahman. Let's come back together, inshallah. So, this passage has a lot. And remember, we said we went slightly out of order because chronologically, because next week, inshallah, we're going to zoom back and see what brings them here. But as you're looking at this moment in particular, this can be considered the pinnacle or the height, or really just a great honor from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to his family and to Prophet Ibrahim. In verse number 124, which is a review, it's not part of our reflection today, but I want to remind you that many ulama indicated in the tafsir of this ayah, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's selection of Prophet Ibrahim with al-risala, which is not something that someone can gain or ask for or get out of their own qualities. It is something that is selected by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, prophethood and messengerhood. And yet many ulama commented about the connection between these two. That when Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam was tested by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with some commandments, and he completed them perfectly and completely. قَالَ إِنِّي جَعِلُكَ لِلنَّاسِ إِمَامًا. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala then on account gave him a risala or leadership over all mankind. So an application in our lives is the importance of seeing closeness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which is a gift, which is a blessing from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but it is not a haphazard one, hasha lillah, right? And it is something that after desire, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala expects us to make effort and to strive and to give and to sacrifice. And so as we look at this moment in this long life, do not be deceived to feel that this came accidentally or momentarily or quickly or without sacrifice. We are looking at a great quality of a great family, but we are looking near the end of well over 100 years spent in the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Multiple countries, movement, sacrifice, giving, striving, making full effort to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And as we've been going along, we've been actually collecting qualities that can be imitated from this great family. Inshallah, at the very end of the course, we'll collect them all. You have heard them all, but we'll put them in one list. If you haven't done that already, maybe a dozen or 13 different qualities. For example, we talked a couple of times ago about the quality of al-hilm, forbearance. But there are several qualities that really shine in this passage. Did anyone discuss a quality from the characteristics of Prophet Ibrahim and his family that stood out to you in this passage? I know you discussed more than that. I'm asking specifically about qualities and characteristics.
In Ayah 126, the dua the Prophet Ibrahim and Islam makes starts out with the dua for emin, or peace or contentment, rather than for material. It's a reflection of how or where his focus was.
Jazakumullah khairan. And it's beautiful, and a dimension of this ayah that stands out to me. I'm reminded of a statement of a teacher who once said that if you wish to lead and build others, or in a youth group or an MSA or a family, then essentially you are seeking to help others grow from the vastness of your own soul, from the vastness of your own nafs. In other words, what you do not have, you cannot give. It's a very high bar. But it's interesting to notice that the security that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that Prophet Ibrahim asks Allah for this city, is a reflection of the vastness of security and salamat al-qalb, right? The soundness and purity of his heart. And he now asks this to be extended to others. It's a beautiful reflection. In the next ayah, what stands out to you?
Ibrahim alayhi salam is asking for Allah to accept his need, and makes him think about us. Ibrahim alayhi salam is father of the prophets, so he's asking questions.
Sure.
Afterwards, he's asking, how are you the father of the prophets, and you're still asking for
it? It's a very profound point. I would encourage you to center yourselves on these ayat and reflect on it deeply. The building of Al-Kaaba, actually, there are a number of narrations of the Prophet ﷺ that give us additional detail. And in particular, there's a narration of Ibn Abbas, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala be pleased with them both. In the hadith in the collection of Imam al-Bukhari, which, to summarize, talks about a visit of Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam to Ismail, who's now a young man. And remember, Prophet Ismail lived most of his young life outside of the physical company of his of his father. This was not from negligence or not even from desire per se. It was from the unique, responsibilities that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave this particular family. It's not a typical setup. And yet, the hadith talks about a reception and what is between a father and a son and a son and a father. love and so on, that shows the warmth and the happiness with which Ismail alayhi salam received his father. And this is really a very high praise of a woman that we will continue to study, a great believing woman in Hajar, that she raised Ismail in this way despite the circumstances that she was tested with. It is not something that anyone would wish for from just a dunya perspective, but this is not an average family. They had to give sacrifices that were not asked of average people. And Prophet Ibrahim shares with him a commandment that he has been entrusted with by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But initially in the hadith, he does not say what it is. So Ismail alayhi salam, initially, he asks his advice or his opinion, and this is very interesting that he was constantly engaging his family in the worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Remember, at this point, he had engaged him earlier in the issue of being asked to sacrifice his son. The Prophet Ismail says, قَالَ فَاصْنَعْ مَا أَمَرَكَ رَبُّكَ. He says, so fulfill what your Lord has commanded. Remember, the last time that we know of that he was asked of this, what was the commandment? To sacrifice his son. Okay? According to the dominant interpretation, that is Zabiyah is Ismail. Then Prophet Ibrahim asks, وَتُعِينُنِي, that will you support me in this? قَالَ وَأُعِينُ. He said, and I will support you. It is very important to notice that this is an unconditional surrender without knowing what it is. And in particular, because this is a task of great honor and great nobility and so on, it is that much more important to emphasize to ourselves and to protect us from what shaitan would suggest to us, that it came haphazardly, came through a lottery, came by accident. Know that this was an unconditional surrender, even at this stage of life. And it is only here that Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam shares with him that he has been commanded to raise the Kaaba from its foundations. Very, very interesting. This hadith is in the collection of Imam al-Bukhari, as I mentioned. I summarizing it. Now back in the ayah that speaks to this occasion. Now this is arduous physical labor. Part of the sacrifice again, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala could have sent angels and they'd raise it. But there's a sunnah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that, the accomplishments of this ummah are built off of the sacrifice and striving of people, even if the results are from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we know of Maqam Ibrahim, where Prophet Ibrahim would look to the straightness and the properness and so on, and would constantly go back and go forward. And both of them were carrying stones. Prophet Ibrahim, of course, at this time, a more elderly and older man, and raising Al-Kaaba from its foundations. Now, as they're doing this, what are they doing in the ayah? They're making dua for what? For Allah's acceptance. This is a very profound point that was shared with us by this group, that really a person could take for granted if Allah did not accept from you, He would not ask you to raise His house. If Allah did not accept from you, He would not give you the message. And yet, it is the intentness for al-ikhlas and the sincerity and the caution of al-qabul, that these actions would be accepted, that this family is striving for al-ikhlas even in this purest and most noble of actions. From the practical applications of this, that is often forgotten, that a teacher mentioned to me and I would like to share with you, is that in performing an ibadah, especially those that are seen by people, to build a habit of making dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for al-ikhlas as one of the purifying steps. This brings al-ikhlas to the forefront of the mind. It is a word and a ibadah that helps center the nafs on not taking it for granted. That this niyyah is for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that it is not corrupted by the eyes of people, that it is not wavering over time. This is a very practical example, for example, to memorize this dua. This dua is not exclusive to this action, it's not only for Al-Kaaba, but to memorize رَبَّنَا تَقَبَّلْ مِنَّا إِنَّكَ أَنْتَ السَّمِيعُ الْعَلِيمُ. To make this dua, to memorize it, inshallah, even if from transliteration, to understand what it means and to make it a habit. You're running an MSA meeting, you're teaching a class, you have a youth group, you're doing this, you're going to make it a habit that you're revisiting this dua. Another dua that many teachers recommend is from the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. You can find it in Hisn al-Muslim, or we can send a link out on the page. Allahumma inna na'udhu bika min an nushrika bika shay'an na'lamu wa nastaghfiruka lima la na'lamu. That we seek refuge in you and Allah, in you, O Allah, that we would associate with you something that we know, and we seek your forgiveness for that which we do not know. So this is asking Allah for protection from knowing insincerity and an admission of vulnerability and asking for Allah's forgiveness for unknowing insincerity, for the pulls of dunya and the things that creep in. If this is the habit of two prophets in the raising of Al-Kaaba, then our speeches are more deserving of it. Then our teaching is more deserving of it. Then our, coming and going, then our interaction with people is in more need of it. It's a very, very healthy and helpful habit. And we'll close just quickly with a narration from Aisha radiallahu anha about the ayah. This is Surah Al-Mu'minun, Surah number 23, verse number 60. That Aisha radiallahu anha, she asked the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam about this ayah. وَالَّذِينَ يُؤْتُونَ مَا آتَوْا وَقُلُوبُهُمْ وَجِلَةٌ. Those that give what they give while their hearts are trembling in fear. See, this is in a longer passage in Surah Al-Mu'minun where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about different characteristics. So Aisha, based on her understanding of the Quran, these people are doing a good deed, they're giving sadaqah, and their hearts are trembling. So Aisha asked the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, قالت Aisha, أهم الذين يشربون الخمر ويسرقون? Aisha asked the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, are these the people that drink alcohol and steal? Why did she ask that? So they're doing a good deed, why are their hearts trembling in fear? She rationalized that it must be because they have so many sins, they're not sure if Allah is going to accept this good deed. But it's a good deed, so why are they scared? You see her thinking. It's the natural thing, it's the thinking that would come to our minds first. قَالَ لَا يَا بِنْتَ الصِّدِّيقِ. The Prophet ﷺ said, no, O daughter of Abu Bakr. وَلَكِنَّهُمُ الَّذِينَ يَصُومُونَ وَيُصَلُّونَ وَيَتَصَدَّقُونَ. Rather, they are the people that fast and pray and give in charity. وَهُمْ يَخَافُونَ أَلَّا يُقْبَلَ مِنْهُ. And they are fearful, what if Allah did not accept from them? And then the Prophet ﷺ connected it with the next verse, verse number 61. أُولَٰئِكَ الَّذِينَ يُسَارِعُونَ فِي الْخَيْرَاتِ وَهُمْ لَهَا سَابِقُونَ. So these people attain a very high praise from Allah. They're the people, يُسَارِعُونَ, they rush to good deeds. We're talking about hella, right? And the pulls of dunya and so on. So these people purify themselves until they see a good deed, they rush to it. وَهُمْ لَهَا سَابِقُونَ. They are competing with other great people in doing good deeds. This one question, what if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, did Allah accept my deed? But not in a self-loathing, probably not, I'm not worth it. No, not that nonsense. This spiritual elevation and refinement, that one question has the power to turn around an entire life. Really, I'm not exaggerating. And ikhlas has the power to turn the orientation of an entire life. A person that thinks that they've made it, at worst is nifaq, yes, but even at best, what? They're measuring themselves against Oh, alhamdulillah, I pray Jummah. More than 90% of Muslims don't. I'm sweeter than sliced bread. You know what I'm saying? Like, at best, stagnation. At best, low standards. At best, pulls of dunya. But this humility before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, this vulnerability has a great refining and elevating power in one's life. And I made an unusual decision to fast forward to enable the question, inshallah, that we will be examining next time. That we're looking at the pinnacle here. Imagine purifying the house, raising the house from Al-Kaaba. And they had this vulnerability. How? And we're starting to peel back. Here's the ikhlas that they had in that moment. How do I build ikhlas in my life? That's the question we've started examining today. How do I build ikhlas in my life? How do I know if Allah has accepted my deeds? But then inshallah, if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grants us health and tawfiq, what we're going to do is rewind. How did they get to the top of the mountain? And that's going to take us to an uncomfortable question, but a question that is very deeply intertwined with this family, the issue of al-ibtila, tests and trials. So I want you to be collecting these characteristics. Okay, all you academic folks that want a list of 12 or 13 things, it'll be there. We'll do it for you, just for you at the end, inshallah, we'll have the chapter summary. But along the way, we're collecting it. So we have this characteristic of an ikhlas, and then what these trials are. Now, nobody wishes for trials, no one wants hardship, but trials also include power, authority, money, wealth. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can try with ease. We'll look at the fiqh of al-ibtila in this great family by rewinding back to some of the earlier commandments, inshallah. We'll have this discussion of al-ikhlas, and then moving to al-ibtila of this family, inshallah. From there, actually, we'll take a special lens, inshallah, look on a great woman of Islam, Sayyidah Hajar, inshallah, maybe 2 or 3 weeks from now, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. So ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to accept. Subhanahu wa ta'ala.